the race conversation. So tonight is being organised and hosted by the EmPoC group, so East Midlands People of Colour group. And Asha and Kusaladevi especially put a lot of effort in to organising this evening. And the reason we wanted to have this evening is because the EmPoC group came out of George Floyd's death. And we wanted, the group was created because we wanted a space of trust, of comfort, where we could share our experiences of being people of colour. But we want to extend that into the wider Sangha, where we can have this shared experience and have the race conversation, because this is about everybody. So, that being said, the race conversation.
Thank you.
Great, thanks Rio. Yeah, big welcome, Eugene, and lovely to be here with Asha as well. So a big welcome to you all. My name's Kusaladevi, so I've met many of you, but not all of you. So yeah, really lovely to have you here at the Buddhist Centre. So yeah, we've got time for the race conversation, and then we will have some space for questions at the end, so don't worry, you can get in there with all your juicy questions. But yeah, I just thought, just to start off really, I wondered, Eugene, if you'd just like to say a bit about yourself. So it'd be great to hear whatever you think really is helpful and relevant to share with us in relation to this conversation, and perhaps also in relation to your connection with Buddhism and Triratna. So just a bit of an introduction would be wonderful.
Okay, I've been around for a while. I think it's about 26 years, maybe 27 years is probably the amount of time. And I started off actually going to a people of colour retreat. It was a whole week. And it was the first thing, it was the first encounter with Buddhism. And it wasn't really a Buddhism retreat as I knew it. It was like a meditation retreat, I suppose. But I knew it was in a Buddhist context, and I went there for meditation. And then subsequently I went, I sort of kept on going to retreats. And sometimes there were weekend retreats, sometimes there were full retreats. But the first retreat I went, because I'm also a psychotherapist, and I guess those are the two, and also right now I'm going through the ordination process, so the GFR Mitra. But on that retreat, it was really, really powerful, because I thought I was kind of thinking, there was a part of myself that wasn't allowed expression, in the world in general. There's a part of me. I couldn't quite identify what it was, but I just thought there was this part of me that was just restricted by the world. And I think, of course, there are parts of me that were restricted by the world, but there are parts of me that are not restricted by the world as well. That I sort of generate for myself, my sort of internal scripts. So I went on that retreat thinking I would become this person, because it was a people of colour retreat, and all the things around race wouldn't necessarily be there, and all of a sudden I'd be this kind of different kind of guy, So it was a bit disappointing. I was kind of the same person there than I was anywhere else. Which is a bit of a downer, but it was also a bit of like, okay, it's not necessarily race that kind of is organising me. There are other things, things that I can do, and it sort of set me on a journey. And also, while I was there, I just got into it was called the Weeping Retreat, because it was mainly men who were weeping. It's got to be said. So it was about 6 or 7 of us, and every night there used to be one of us would go, and I don't really know what that was about, but something had been released in that first sort of encounter with that group at the time, and I'm good friends with many of those people in that first retreat that I went on. So. I'm also go to the London Buddhist Centre, so I got Mitra study GFR group there. I went to the North London Buddhist Centre for a little while I lived on Holloway Road in London, and right now I'm living in Walthamstow and my wife's an order member as well. So I'm surrounded by them. They're all over the place, but it's all over the place. So it felt sort of almost inevitable. but I mean, I remember also reading a book, the Tibetan Book of the Living and Dead, is that the one? And that was before I went on this retreat. And my parents are from Jamaica, and I used to go to Jamaica every year at Christmas. And I used to travel around on my own, just kind of hire a car and just travel around. And I brought this book with me, the Tibetan book. And I had to take the jacket off, in the old days when the jacket used to come off the book. And it kind of looked like a Bible.
You got away
So I
with
was
it.
carrying around this thing, and everyone was fine with it. And I'd just be sitting on the beach and just reading this book. It was heavy. It was heavy, and it was like mystical, and it was a bit strange. It wasn't like coming to the Dharma and coming to the Dharma class, and it wasn't like that. But it was there was something there, and it was just really something that's piqued my interest with Buddhism itself. But it's only been really recently that Buddhism itself. I mean, it's all been about Sangha for me. It's been about the people and my connections with them.
So it's the Sangha that drew you in first.
The Sangha, the Sangha kept me there. I mean, I think especially the PSC Sangha, because they were kind of like me in lots of ways, and they were also looking to develop themselves. They were kind of interested in being good people, being kind, being compassionate, and why would I go anywhere else? That was my thought, and that's kind of how it's been pretty much until quite recently, really. Rio mentioned George Floyd, and just. I mean, I'd written the book before that, and I often think about, I wonder how this book would have flew or not flew if that didn't happen. So timing wise, it seemed to fit in quite well. And I think it was I was doing Mitra studies, so it was the Dharma really at the time, just sort of, which kind of helped me to stay grounded. There wasn't anything particular. It wasn't like this particular reading of the Dharma or this particular thing. It was the whole thing. Somehow it just kind of held me, and it kind of I could feel the power at that point. So there was definitely a turning point in terms of it wasn't just the people, my friends. Although it's a good reason to stay into Buddhism is having friends, that's for sure. Of course, meditation as well. So that's, meditation has always been quite powerful.
Eugene, I wonder if you could say a little bit more about, just kind of within the context of your kind of Buddhist journey. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about, particularly kind of your involvement in the race conversation in terms of, as kind of an activist, as a psychotherapist, as a kind of founder of, Batan or the network. So just kind of wondered if you could share a little bit with the Sangha about those threads of your...
Yeah, I mean, I trained as a psychotherapist. I was the only person of colour in the training, and then actually along the way, there were other people of colour who joined the class and stuff. But I was only black
Where did you
man
train
as well.
in?
That was in Islington, place in Islington, and I trained in something called integrative arts psychotherapy. Basically, it's kind of using metaphor and really metaphor to go beyond words. That's the kind of idea. anyway, I kind of just got, I kind of got through the training. The last few years were quite difficult, and I was trying to work out why were they so difficult. It seemed to be fine the first few years, and then when I finished my training, I was approached by people to, is there a, do you know a South Asian therapist in, Hounslow or something, or Wembley, and of course I didn't really know anyone. I knew some people who I had trained with, and my own therapist who lived in Acton, but apart from that, that's all I knew. And I decided to see if there was some way that somewhere that therapists were listed, and there wasn't anyone. But anyway, not even in the States. I thought, well, no, of course in America there should be,
right.
But anywhere, but no. Anyway, so I put together a directory, and what came from that directory was students really were kind of talking about their experience, and I thought, well, that's my experience, and the experience was really, especially I think also in Buddhism as well. You're invited to kind of delve into your inner world, aren't you? Your conditioning is supposed to kind of let it sort of come out and kind of be known. And this is similar with therapy as well. And so there was always that invitation, but then, if you're a black person, a person of color, and then you started to speak about your experience of race, it was either like a big volcano, or it was just like tumbleweeds. The two kind of experiences, and that was such a universal experience that people had in their training. But of course, they paid their money. Slightly different from Buddhism. You pay your money, and you want to be able to work on the things that you want to work on. And it's not all that they were talking about, but it is a significant part of a lot of people of colour's lives. It's that impacts them and shapes their mental health, shapes their outlook on life. If they can't talk about it, then there's a big hole there. So we started to support students to get to the end of the training, because a lot of students were dropping out. Again, there's no sort of figures, there's been no kind of polls or anything like that or research. It's more sort of anecdotal, but a lot of people were reporting that they couldn't stay, that either get overwhelmed by their own experience, and they'd get overwhelmed by not being received. And so we started to create groups that would support students. And then we became advocates for students as well, within their training. It's not something that I'm a sort of naturally an introvert. I don't really like conflict. So, and this idea of just sort of going in there and doing damage, whatever, the fantasy that we all have, or that kind of the other fantasy of kind of saying that killer line that's gonna cut through. Denzel Washington or whatever just sort of comes in, slices everyone apart with that killer line. That never happens. That never happens. Yeah. You might have a killer line, but it drops like a stone anyway, so no one really. So all of those kind of fantasies.
It's real life, right?
This is real life, what do you do when you're in supervision and you're talking about a client that you're working with, who happens to be an Asian woman, and there's just silence on the other side.
A great, invaluable kind of resource that you set up and established to support Black and Asian, South Asian, and to kind of really kind of be able to kind of fulfill their personal aspiration to become a therapist. Yeah. But also to be able to deliver that therapy to people in the community who it's like a really unmet, isn't it? But we'll come into that a little bit more, I think.
Yeah.
I've got a question kind of
Okay.
that might help us tease that out a little
All
bit
right.
more. But yeah, great, thank you. Yeah, shall we kind of, is it me? Oh yeah, it's me. I could put my glasses on.
Okay.
Yeah, because
What have you got
I'm
there?
trying to read my own
All
writing. Yeah, I kind of felt, I just want to say, Eugene, we're so kind of grateful and feeling really blessed to have you here with us this evening. So yeah, just to kind of acknowledge that. And I kind of wanted to really follow on from your lead in the book.
Yeah.
And kind of just thought it might be helpful for me to just kind of set the scene a little bit in terms of, I would see my back's not towards anybody's, set the scene really in terms of the British context when we speak about race and racism, yeah? So I kind of felt that, you know, it's, so just to give you a quick kind of, you know, and my intention here is not to tell you what you already know. It's just in the context of setting the kind of So kind of really what we know, and this is fact. It's not myth. It's not fantasy. It's not kind of films or any kind of So kind of from the 15th to 16th century onwards, white Europeans began categorizing human populations through racial hierarchies. With white people being at the top, and the darker you are, the lower you are on that hierarchy. And so we know that the brutality of race has a long established history, as you speak about in your book, right? And so therefore then we must begin with the beginning in the context of slavery. Yeah. And then when slavery ended, colonization began. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And so kind of, the colonisation began with the jewel in the crown, literally. Yeah. Right? And I just kind of felt, wanted to say, and with the recent death of, the monarch, the Queen, there has been talk about kind of, calls for that jewel to be returned to its rightful home. And then we have a history in the UK in terms of race-related riots, from 1981, 75, the kind of smaller localised, and then of course the kind of nationwide riot following Mark Duggan, the young black man that was murdered by police in 2011, and just kind of felt it was really important to just remember and honour Stephen Lawrence. And of course, the death of George Floyd caused outcry, disgust, and a movement. Yeah. And then if we bring it down to kind of, we know that deaths of black men in police custody, the overrepresentation of black people in the mental health system, but underrepresentation in the more psychotherapeutic elements of that provision, including, psychotherapy. More people of colour died during the pandemic. Yeah. Housing and healthcare, poorer outcomes. And then, of course, there's the daily microaggressions, which, we kind of face. So I felt your book implicitly and explicitly urges people to understand and to accept the severity of the racism of the past. Yes. I just kind of wanted you to kind of, say, is there anything that you'd like to add to that? Is there anything you need to correct that I've said that perhaps isn't right? And just kind of, and I wondered if it would be, and it might not be, but I wondered if you could then try to connect for us how that intergenerational trauma that you speak about kind of links with that kind of panacea of the history when we talk about race and kind of racism. Yeah. I mean, I think it's really good that you drew all of that out, and the history. A lot of people say, "Oh, it doesn't really matter," about that. It's a long time ago. Yeah, but it's funny how people sort of choose what history they want to value. And again, that theme comes up time and time again in race and lots of other repressions. Where
where you say, oh, this doesn't matter, but
Yeah.
it sort of does matter over here, but not over there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's, well, for me anyway, the way I've sort of, not just me, but other people have kind of, are thinking about race right now is a kind of reenactment. There's a reenactment of the past happening in the present moment. So me and you have a conversation, and of course we are having a conversation in this moment, but there's also this past shadow that's coming in, and I am behaving like the way I've been ascribed in my racial identity. I'm being ascribed this identity, you've been ascribed an identity, you have been ascribed an identity, and in some ways we play that out.
Right.
We play it out. Now, we can sometimes we play it out unconsciously, sometimes we play it out consciously. There's always going to be unconscious bits, and there might be some conscious bits. And then when you start going back into the past, what are we playing out? Well, we're playing out, well, it's actually fear, destruction, brutality, and sort of crazy-mindedness. So all those things. And if you go back, if you go back, some people say, oh, let's just start from, the Tottenham riots or something. Let's just start there. So you can't just start there. You need to go right back. So I think it's important to have a sense of that context, because in the moment, when your heart rate goes up, when you almost become. And I've sort of seen this for myself. It's sort of almost become a kind of a mystery to myself. I'm having this race conversation. I don't even know who I am. I'm almost like a different person. Unsure, unclear. My mind is all murky. I was great 5 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And I'll be great 5 minutes after our conversation ends.
Yeah.
But right in that moment, I don't even like myself. That's about the sum of it. So how can I have a conversation if I don't even like myself? I mean, it's just not going to be possible. So, but yeah, and so I think it's really important to have that sense. I mean, if you believe in this idea of trauma, then where you kind of get overwhelmed by, what's going on around you. So your normal defences, the things that you would normally do, just don't work anymore. They sort of break down almost. And when you think, well, what's there to be? Why should I feel trauma right now? Especially if you're in a relationship with your friends and people you know very well. Maybe have different races, maybe assign different racial identities. And you're getting on fine. You're getting on fine. And in fact, if you didn't talk about race, then things might be okay. Well, of course, it's okay in some way. There's sort of a pretense of okayness. But why is it in that moment, even though you may even love the person in front of you, that you somehow something happens and they almost become the enemy? You don't have to go back too far. To see that actually that was the case. That was actually the reality of life. And there are still places that sort of have apartheid right now today. And that's what happens there. So I just think it's really important to have that perspective, because if you just take the present moment and just go on that, you're going to miss almost everything about that interaction. And a lot of people just say, it was only just, and it's just so easy. I do it. We all do it. Well, we're conditioned to do it. We're conditioned just to sort of say, And so the invitation really, I guess, is to not go, but just, okay, well, what was it about that interaction that was causing hurt and harm? And staying there.
Yeah.
It's very hard to stay.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've said enough about that.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you.
Is it just in case? I just want to check if people online can hear if the mic is on this table. Yeah, great. Yeah.
Also, I just want to invite everyone,
Yeah.
as they're listening to us, because if you're not engaged in the conversation and you're just listening, sometimes it's even harder work. To be fair, isn't it? I don't know, but so yeah, the invitation is to sort of stay with the body, stay with what's going on inside. The temptation is to sort of float off into the future.
Yeah.
And think, when I have that conversation, I'm going to say this, or this is going to happen, or go back into the past to the last time something happened. And to stay in the present just makes everything simpler. So the invitation is just to do that and stay present and see what happens when you stay present to the moment and not float off in your mind somewhere else. Sorry, just.
Yeah, thank you. I think that ties in actually really nicely to what I wanted to ask. So I wanted to kind of make that link between just that really important history that you've given us and then why it's important for us as a Sangha to have this conversation, to have the race conversation, really.
Well, it's already happening, isn't it? That's the thing. It's already happening. And why wouldn't you? In some ways, but I think it's kind of very pragmatic in some ways. For me at least, I think meditation is a great thing, and if people want to get into Buddhism as well, and I think that's good too. But I think the way that Buddhism is well, certainly the interpretation of Buddhism that we've been given doesn't necessarily doesn't speak directly into oppression, doesn't it? In social constructs of oppression, doesn't speak directly into. It does it a little bit maybe with gender. We have single sex activities, because we know that we're conditioned as a man or a woman in certain ways, and we sort of set things up. So that we can sort of deal with those constructs in a way and and break them down. But when it comes to others, so I think there's a need to kind of have that conversation to kind of create a narrative where actually we could include that, and I think the Dharma is big enough to take that all in. Certainly in India, Dr. Ambedkar has kind of, certainly for the Indian order members or the Indian Sangha there, that's what their life is about. It's about caste. That's what they're dealing with. And this, Dr. Ambedkar has sort of come in and kind of really apply the Dharma to those conditions. So I think there could, it's a little subtler here. Sometimes you kind of think, well, does even racism exist? Sometimes you ask that question. In India, caste exists, and you see it, and it's plain. You don't have to ask any questions. So yeah. But I think there's some way that we could go, and the reason why would be, well, it's a big part of people's conditioning. It's not the whole of their conditioning. But for some people, it is the whole, actually, very, very significant. For others, it's perhaps slightly less so, but it's going to be part of their conditioning at some point. And to not be able to attend to your conditioning,
It's not very
well,
Buddhist,
it's not very Buddhist, no. No, it's not very Buddhist. And to have a context to do that, I think, is really important. At the moment, that context is POC Sanghas and various things like that, people call us Sanghas. But I don't know if it should stay, it shouldn't just be there, it should be wherever. Wherever. So, hence this conversation, I guess, yeah.
Maybe I could say a little bit about my sort of journey, in a way, with this area. So definitely George Floyd's death was a significant moment for me in, I guess just seeing more clearly actually the race construct, which you talk about in your book, and that oppression that I suppose I knew was there, but something in that moment sort of went in a bit more into my heart, into my being. That's sort of how I describe that. And I definitely was aware around that time that, you know, the population of Nottingham was very diverse culturally, ethnically, racially, and yet we weren't seeing that represented in our Sangha. And it felt essential that that sort of changed, really. So, and I know for others that are part of the Buddhist Centre Council, the trustees here, and others that are sort of working and involved here, they feel similarly. It's very important that we are open to anyone, and I think these conversations, I'm hoping that these conversations will support that, actually, that we all become more aware of our racial conditioning, and that we're also able to sort of empathise, understand, listen to people's experience, different experiences to our own, and in that way sort of open the doors to more and more people, really. So yeah, that's why I want us to have this conversation. Well, that's one of the reasons. I'm sure there's others as well. Yeah, that's, for me, that just feels really important.
Yeah, yeah.
And you know, it's not easy.
No.
Again, you say this in your book, it's not, these conversations aren't always easy, and they're not always easy to stay with.
Yeah, yeah.
And yet, for me, that is what Buddhist practice is about also, is like turning towards, with kindness, whatever's there, really.
Yeah, yeah.
And sort of, how do we just sort of stay there? And actually, it's interesting that Ari Lochin spoke about alchemy next week, because for me, there's sort of an alchemy when kindness meets whatever is in our experience, and we just sort of with that kindly. And I think that can bring a lot to these conversations probably as well.
But I think also, I mean, you're talking about, you know, bringing different, you know, a more diverse group into the Buddhist centres, and along with psychotherapy, I mean, in a way, those are sort of like, you know, that's what they're all about, isn't it? Meeting suffering, you know, psychotherapy and these centres as well. But also, I think it's sometimes easier to think, oh, okay, well, you know, these are the people who are suffering, and we need to sort of support them, and reach out to them and give them, create the conditions. But I think there's another layer to this as well. And if you've been ascribed an identity, a white identity, there's work there, which is quite painful as well. And what I've sort of discovered, what I've noted is that actually it doesn't really matter what racial identity you've been ascribed. Trying to get a hold of your racial conditioning and kind of grapple with it and trying to make sense of it and trying to go beyond it is painful. It doesn't really matter what racial identity you've been ascribed, because everyone's been given something, and there's suffering in all of them. If you're being given a white identity, in some ways, society says, well, so it gives you a way out. You don't. There's kind of these protections. You don't have to engage. And if you've been sort of people if you've been racialized as black or Asian or whatever, and it's harder to get out of those conditions. It's harder to kind of like sidestep it and say, well, it doesn't matter, I'll just move on, get on with my life. So I guess what I'm saying is that identity that you might have is kind of, I think people are on a quest to sort of see if they can get rid of it. How can I get rid of this thing? If you've got very, very dark skin, really dark skin, it's really, really hard to get rid of it. You're kind of literally every step you take in the world kind of has sort of like reinforcing you get this world coming back at you. And if you've got very, very white skin, you take steps and the world doesn't really reinforce that you even got a race at all. So, you know, if someone being given a, you know, being ascribed a white identity, it's very, very, very difficult to get into that space because you're not taking the steps every day. So it's a lot of work, and the work is not necessarily going to be like, you know, tough. But I think making the decision is a big step. And if you do make the decision and think, actually, I want to, there's something of value there for me here, that I can see the world in a different way. And if you take that step, and then, you know, it's just a series of little steps as you go, it can really be transformative to people. And I've been through, I mean, it's been transformative to me. You can't sidestep identity and sort of say, well, I'm just going to sort of sidestep it and carry on and be a sort of you know, kind of like a, go beyond identity, as we all want to do in Buddhism. You have to sort of go through it, don't you? You have to sort of take it on. What is this thing that I've got? And, you know, you hate it. You hate yourself at times. You might not. You might think, actually, that's not so bad. But, you know, and then you figure out a way to kind of not identify with it as strongly.
Okay. Just want to dive a little bit deeper there with what you're saying, some of what you've said, okay, because it kind of links to kind of, so can we just kind of think about a little bit more, actually, maybe not directly from your book, but a couple of interviews that I've watched you give. You speak about kind of, you know, that kind of, although we might be, we might choose to give ourselves an identity of, well, you know, I'm a human being, for example, right?
Oh, right, yeah.
Or kind of, you know, we're all one race, etc. But you draw our attention, I feel, to the point that whatever our own definition, whatever definition I might choose to give myself, the world around me is going to give me an identity that's based on, as you said, the colour of my skin, right?
Yeah.
And I kind of was thinking, as I was kind of thinking, reflecting, I kind of thought, you know, what, so it can be tempting perhaps for us to kind of say, you know, the thing we need to do in terms of is just stop talking about race, right? Just stop talking about race.
Yeah.
So when we hear, I don't see your colour, I see you as Eugene, you know, or I don't see you as a black person, I just see you as a human. In me, and I'm talking about my personal kind of, so that body, that discomfort, I feel that in my body, right? It's a physiological, it's a response that actually prevents me from being verbal. I'm not able to then engage in conversation. I've shut, something's happening in the body, right? So I was kind of reflecting on that. And I kind of wondered, you know, why do you think this is so? You know, and kind of, I wondered if you could link it maybe a little bit to kind of images and stories. You speak about the stories that we've been told, right? And I kind of wondered, you know, like, and what suffering does that narrative create that prevents us from equanimity? So there's a bit in there, but we can unpack it a little bit if you need, you know, if you need. But so kind of, because I think the lens that's pointed is actually one of subjugation, right? As opposed to, so when I'm seeing through that lens, it's a lens that I experience that's quite subjugating, as opposed to kind of liberating. Yeah. Why is, you know, what's going on there, Eugene?
There's a lot there, isn't there? It's a lot. I mean, there's so many layers to all of this stuff, and it's, well, you know, what layer am I going to talk about at this point? But I mean, you started off by this idea that you know, there's an inner identity that people have, and a sort of outer identity, and I think certainly when if there's a lot of mix in your identity, and there's some countries that are so, just kind of like a hodgepodge of, just different racial identities all together. But what, and so you might sort of say, well, I don't believe in this identity lark around race, and I'm not going to attend to it. And if I don't attend to it, then it doesn't exist. That's the sort of thing, isn't it, you're talking about? But of course, it does exist. And if you read a social construct, it doesn't really exist. It only exists in the mind. Well, if it only exists in the mind, then we can just discard it, But of course, the world has a different idea about they give you it, they ascribe it to you, whether you want it or not. So that's just a plain reality, and you can either sort of say, well, I'm just going to bypass that, or you just deal with the reality of the world as it is, which I think is what we want to do in Buddhism. That we want to sort of face things as they are. And the second part was around.
The second part was just maybe trying to link it. I wondered if it was kind of a trauma response that I feel, that.
Yeah, I mean, I think when people say, "Oh, I don't see your colour, I don't see you as human," and I think it's well-meaning, because what they really mean is whatever things we put into that social construct of black, which is normally quite negative. I don't want to put it on you, and I think that's that sort of feels fair enough, doesn't it? It's like, well, why would I want to put that on you? So it's coming from that. I know it's coming from that perspective. Yeah. But of course, once you say that, what you're also saying is, I can't see the suffering that you're of your life around that. And in some ways, I don't think it's so much that things go on in the world and people miss, and there are these microaggressions. I think what really it's the sort of non-response. I think is, well, for me at least, is the most sort of harmful part of it. It's not that someone's made a mistake. Yeah. It's just that there's no response. That there's no kind of like, yeah, I can see that you're hurt, or whatever, whatever response. Often the response is, come on, it wasn't that bad, or get over yourself. Yeah. Come on, this is, that was then, this is that. Was, yeah. Look how old, you're a big man now, just get on with it. And again, so that kind of constant not being met, that's kind of really, that's where the suffering is. Yeah. And that's exactly it. And what tends to happen is the person who's not been met, it depends on their character, of course, but sometimes they either sort of retreat further and further back, but sometimes they get louder. And it's not being met, and they get louder, and they're not being met, and it gets louder and louder and louder. Yeah. And all of a sudden it's like, you're too loud. You're too, Yeah. But really what people are trying to do is kind of like, you're not hearing me, you're not connecting me, you're not seeing me, you're not seeing me. And that cycle just happens time and time and time again.
Thank you. I'm really conscious of time. We're like fast running.
How long have we got?
Really great. Thank you.
Oh, we'll open up in a minute for questions.
Okay.
Maybe at 9, or we could push it a bit further. We do want to leave time for questions for you. Yeah.
What time are you here till?
1:30.
1:30. Okay. Oh, right.
Yeah, we've got time. Yeah, I think. I think I just wanted to draw out one or two quotes from your book. I just really loved when you said at the beginning of the book that you're writing to awaken the ethical values of the reader.
Right, yeah.
I thought that was very interesting. It struck me partly because I have an interest in ethics. My name's Kusaladevi, so the Kusala bit is related to ethics. So there was a sort of resonance in something there. But I wondered if you could say a bit more explicitly what that would look like in a Buddhist Sangha. in relation to the race conversation. So awakening sort of an ethical response in all of us. If there's a specifically Buddhist ethics that would look, or if even you would separate that or not. For you, there's, you know.
I mean, I think the race construct itself kind of does it does sort of it does circumvent, really, doesn't it, our best instincts, you know, like who we would like to be, and somehow race kind of just figures out a way to kind of, you know, just to kind of get round our best instincts somehow. It sort of bypasses it almost. And our best instincts kind of somehow find sort of on the floor somewhere. Or, and when I say best instincts, I mean in like, yeah, sort of ethical, ethics really. Not causing harm. So yeah, somehow they get sort of pushed aside. So, and they're not easy to awaken, because once you awaken them, then, you know, you're kind of into behaviour, you know, like, oh, I'm doing this. I'm not even true to myself, you know, the kind of person I want to be. I'm not being that kind of person. So there can be a kind of a sort of like, on one level, there's, okay, this is the version of myself that I think I am, a good person. And then once things start to awake, you find out, well, actually, maybe that's not the whole story. And it is a threat to identity. And a threat to our identity can mirror kind of almost like the amygdala in the brain, you know, to kind of trigger, you know, all of a sudden you're kind of in this fight-flight kind of place. And so we're working with identity here, aren't we, really? It has to be done kind of mindfully, gently, and because you know, if we go too fast, it can be it doesn't kind of work.
Yeah.
So I think so. It's not so much awakening ethics of so much, because I think, you know, some of us make mistakes, but I think most of us think, okay, well, we're kind of doing okay to some extent on the ethics front. We could do better, of course. But, you know, is it possible to sort of stay the same kind of ethical person in the conversation, in the race conversation? I think that was kind of really what I was getting at. And it's hard because literally everything in the world is telling us that we shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
And if you don't have to go back too far to, you know, if you've been given a white identity, that if you wanted to be ethical and you wanted to be compassionate, you know, your life was at risk. You know, it's not just an idea. Your life was at risk as well. So, there's quite a lot behind bringing your ethical practice to this thing. You know, there's danger. There is literally, you know, your life is at risk, and so it's very, very strong. Of course, in the moment when you're talking to your friend, your life's not necessarily at risk there. And so how do you tease out what is really risky versus this stuff from the past that's just coming in and washing us up? Yeah. So, and that's hard work, but it's not impossible. And you can go some way to having raise conversations in, you know, in particular parts of your life. Obviously, you can't have it all over the place. You can't just sort of walk into, you know, a pub in the East End and just sort of say whatever you want to say. But there are places where you can do this work, and it is literally life changing. for people.
Yeah, kind of as you were just speaking then, Eugene, it kind of made me also think about, because when we're talking about the dangers out there, but it also kind of, you know, in your book you introduce us to the concept, to the notion, actually, you know, of where it's hardwired, you know, the fear, the threat, kind of the regular, you know, system is so kind of. I wondered if, you know, you could say something a little bit maybe about, yeah, kind of real danger versus perceived danger. Our brain isn't designed, you know, it's designed to protect us. So how can we, with the wisdom and the Dharma and the knowledge, you know, how can we kind of level that out so that we can cool that system down somewhat, so we can stay in that window of, as you say, you know, distress
Intolerance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm bringing a sort of neurobiology into the picture, and
Thank you.
I don't know how this fits in with the Dharma at the moment, but I think, you know, I think we can you know, use skillful means, you know, to kind of find our way through this stuff. And I think certainly having an idea in your mind about how your nervous system works, how the brain works, I think it's a good start. Because I talk in the book about actually racism as assault on the body, you know, and first and foremost, it sort of comes into us, and then we try to work it out somehow in our brain. You know, it's coming at us, and I know, you know, we sort of pass on these kind of triggers from parent to child, you know. You know, your mum, you know, a mum or a dad is sort of walking down the street with their little kid, and you know, there's someone from another race across the road. And the child wants to have a conversation with that other person. You know, you could just feel the squeezing of the hand. No, not supposed to do that kind of thing. You know, but, you know, that kind of fizzy body just gets passed on.
Yeah.
And the child goes, okay, this is fizzy body time. I've learned my lesson. And then that child has a child of their own and does the same thing. So these kind of sort of nervous system states get passed on. And you know, meditation is a good way around that. I tell you, when I was writing a chapter about history, I was thinking, well, how am I going to put this in this book without, you know, literally triggering everyone who reads it? I wanted it to be truthful and to the point, but yet not kind of just too much. So I had to sort of really kind of spend time on it. But my own process as I was doing it was also interesting. You know, I literally, so my system kind of retreats, goes into itself. And there were moments I just had to just stop writing and just have a period of meditation, quite sometimes very, very long. And I wouldn't really start writing until I could feel that I was kind of settled in my body. Because I knew if I was settled in my body, there's something sensible that will come out when I start writing. But if I'm sort of like this, I mean, something will come out. But I'll be communicating my inner state to the page. And it's hard to do this work if you know. It's hard to do this work anyway without those kind of states coming in. So that was a real practice actually. I do a lot of work around trauma anyway, so I did a lot of stuff with clients around trauma. How do they manage their trauma? It was very non-verbal. Where's your body? Where's my body in the room? I'm turning over here, you're turning over there. How's that feel? No, I'm going to go back a bit further. Is that better? Yes. You know, just really working at safety. And so I kind of had some knowledge of that. Of course, you know, doing meditation teachings and the mindfulness breathing, compassion practice,
Yeah.
just bringing them back, bringing them back, bringing them back.
Yeah.
So that was part of writing. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I would have. I don't know. Be interesting to see if I didn't do that, what would come out. Next book. It would be a.
Just go.
It would be a, yeah, no, it would be a. I mean, you know, because sometimes I read books on race and I'm sort of like, you know, sort of like literally pinned to the. But I think I must read it because, you know, it's really important and reading. I wanted to see if there's a way of kind of taking in the information without necessarily having that jolt to the body.
Sure.
You know, we will have jolts because there's no way around it, but not to be a continuous jolt. To sort of go up and down, you know, sort of be safe, and then a little bit of danger, and then a bit of safety, and so kind of thinking very much about how someone would read it and how their body would respond, and not keeping them in heightened states too long.
You do literally put in these words, don't you? Pause and breathe.
Pause and breathe, yes.
A number of times throughout the book, and I just found that very. Sometimes I could feel I just wanted to skip over it and read the next bit, but it was like when I did pause and breathe, it was like, oh, I really needed that, you know, just to sort of notice what was happening, what my response was, and to let that sort of sink in more fully. So
the body's got a lot of wisdom, you know. We just bypass it and you know, get into our thinking brain. Maybe we can solve it there.
yeah.
Yeah.
Great.